Welcome to the channel. Immerse yourself in a mystical story set on the enigmatic river street in a small town where time flows differently, children disappear, and shadows stalk every step. Old clocks, diaries, and mirrors of chronicles open doors to a parallel dimension where the past, present, and future intertwine. Will Alex be able to solve the street's mystery and save the innocent, or will he become part of an endless cycle? Autumn always filled Alexey with unease. Especially rainy evenings, when the street seemed deserted and the raindrops tapped against the window with such insistence, as if someone wanted to get inside. That evening, he was sitting at his desk, examining an old box that had been sent to him in the mail with no return address. The desk by the window was cluttered with papers, tape recorders, and newspaper clippings. Strange materials often arrived for him, sometimes out of curiosity, sometimes just to get rid of cursed things. The box was sealed with yellowed tape and smelled of dampness. On the lid, faded ink spelled, "Do not listen after midnight." Alexey smirked. Of course, he intended to listen now. The hands of the wall clock had just passed midnight. Inside the box was an old cassette tape recorder and several tapes. The film looked worn but intact. Alexey held one up to the light. On the white label, a single word was written, "Recording." He turned on the tape recorder. At first, there was a crackling, as if the old tape resisted time. Then a voice emerged. Male, trembling, weary. If anyone is hearing this, it means it's already near. Alexey froze. The voice was not staged. It carried raw, primal terror. It always finds those who seek the truth, the voice continued. A street that isn't on any map, a house where the clocks run backward, do not go there. Never. The tape hissed, like someone scratching metal with fingernails. Then came the sound of breathing. Deep, long, unnatural, no human could breathe like that. Alexey frowned and stopped the cassette. The room fell into a heavy silence. Too heavy. Such occurrences could happen in any year. He looked up at the clock. Its second hand was moving backward. At first, he thought he imagined it. But no. The gears inside clicked, the hands crawled downward, stealing time from the night itself. Alexey leaned back in his chair. Then he noticed his reflection in the window. Behind him stood a silhouette, blurred, dark, like an unfinished sketch. He spun around sharply. The room was empty. Alexey exhaled heavily. Fatigue and working late had played tricks on him, he reassured himself. But when he looked at the clock again, the hands were moving normally, as if nothing had happened. He turned off the light, deciding to go to bed. But the tape recorder clicked on by itself, and the tape kept rolling. The voice sounded again. If you hear me, it means your cycle has already begun. Alexey turned off the recorder. Silence settled over the room like a wet blanket. He could even hear his own breathing, far too loud in the emptiness. Just fatigue, he thought. Nerves. I read too much nonsense. He picked up a mug of cold tea and headed to the kitchen. The floorboards creaked underfoot, treacherously, though they had never done so before. In the dark, the kitchen looked alien, the fridge resembled a massive white coffin, and the raindrops outside tapped so rhythmically it sounded like someone snapping their fingers. Alexey poured himself water and lingered by the window. The yard was empty. Only a lamp, flickering every 10 seconds, cast long shadows on the asphalt. But at one moment, when the light flickered again, he thought he saw a person standing by the trash bins. He squinted. The light went out. When it came back, the bins were empty. Alexey recoiled, spilling the water. Returning to the room, he found the tape recorder running, though he was certain he had turned it off. The tape spun, and the voice spoke again. It enters through mirrors. Never stare too long. Never. The word never ripped into a scream, and the recording stopped. Alexey instinctively glanced at the hallway mirror. He froze. His reflection stood exactly as he did, but its eyes moved. It stared directly at him, while Alexey himself was looking at the mirror from the side. He turned sharply and covered his mouth with his hand. For the first time in a long while, he felt true, icy fear, as if cold water had been poured into his chest. The wall clock began moving backward again. The lamp flickered. A soft step echoed in the corridor. Alexey crept to the door and peered through the peephole. Outside stood a man. Tall, in a long coat. No face, only a blurred smudge, like a smeared photograph. At that moment, the tape recorder clicked on by itself for the third time. If you hear me, it means your cycle has already begun. And someone slowly knocked on the door. Morning greeted Alexey with silence. It seemed the night, with all its shadows and whispers, had been just a dream. But on the desk, next to the tape recorder, lay a cassette. The tape inside had been wound to the very end. He didn't remember doing it himself. Alexey packed his bag. Inside, a tape recorder, a camera, a notebook. His usual set for investigations. But this time, he wasn't sure he was ready for what he might find. In the diary sent along with the cassettes was an address, City N, Reknaya Street, 17. But no such street existed on the map. The journey took half a day. Gray fields, sparse villages, and endless rain outside the train window. Alexey watched the passengers, tired faces, foggy eyes. They all seemed as if it didn't matter to them at all where they were going. When the train stopped at a small station, he got out. The station was empty, even the ticket clerk at the window was asleep, leaning on her hand. The town greeted him with a hollow emptiness. The houses were old, peeling, their windows dark. It seemed people had forgotten how to live, leaving only shells behind. Alexey rented a room in the only hotel. The receptionist, a woman with dull eyes, silently handed him the key. He tried to speak to her. "Excuse me, do you know where Reknaya Street is?" Her gaze flickered to life for a moment. Her face twitched, as if she wanted to say something, but then she shook her head. "We don't have such a street." And returned to her papers. But Alexey noticed her hands were trembling. In the evening, he went for a walk through the town. The streets sank into twilight, the lamps barely glowed, and between them were dark voids. In these voids, it felt as though someone was following him. He turned into a narrow alley and saw an old man sitting on a bench. He was feeding pigeons, though there wasn't a single bird around. "Excuse me," Alexey said. "I'm looking for Reknaya Street." The old man looked up. His pupils were almost non-existent, only a cloudy gray film. "You shouldn't go there," he rasped. "Whoever walks down Reknaya doesn't come back." And again lowered his gaze, continuing to throw bread into the emptiness. Alexey moved on. At the corner, he saw a sign, almost hidden under rust, "Reknast." The arrow pointed into a dark alley where the streetlights didn't work at all. He took out his notebook and made a note, the street does exist, after all. But he didn't dare enter. Not today. From the darkness came a soft whisper. He couldn't make out the words, but he was sure it was speaking to him. Alexey hurried back to the hotel. At night, he was awakened by the sound of footsteps outside the door. Slow, heavy, as if someone was deliberately counting each step. He held his breath. And he heard a soft rustle beneath the door. Go back. Before it's too late. The day began under a gray sky. Clouds hung low, as if ready to crush the town with their weight. The rain no longer fell in sheets but drizzled slowly, turning the streets into a sticky swamp. Alexey stepped out of the hotel. The air was heavy, saturated with dust and dampness at once. The houses smelled of mold and wet plaster. The wind tore pieces of rusty metal from the roofs, and somewhere far down an alley, a door clanged persistently. The town seemed abandoned. The people he'd glimpsed yesterday had vanished. Rare passers-by hurried along, not meeting his gaze. Each step of their shoes echoed loudly, as if the streets were empty sets, not real roads. He turned toward the alley where he had seen the rusty sign with the inscription "Reknast." Yesterday. The alley greeted him with cold. It seemed several degrees colder than the rest of the town. A damp brick wall stretched along the sidewalk, streaked and cracked. Dark weeds grew along it, sprouting straight through the asphalt. The streetlights here were dead. Wiring hung in shreds, like broken veins. Even without light, Alexey felt it, something was there, beyond the street. He stepped forward. Every sound became too loud. His footsteps echoed hollowly. Somewhere in the depths, water dripped. Alexey took out his tape recorder. His voice trembled, though he tried to speak calmly. Reknaya Street. Almost no houses are visible, everything is shrouded in fog. The streetlights are broken. I smell dampness and something else. He didn't finish. Ahead, right in the middle of the street, stood a man. The figure was motionless. Tall, in a long coat that fluttered in the wind. But his face. It wasn't there. Or rather, something was, blurred outlines, like a photograph smeared during printing. There seemed to be a nose, a mouth, eyes, but all in the wrong places, as if someone had failed to assemble the face correctly. Alexey froze. His heart thudded loudly in his chest, blood pounding in his temples. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, staring at him with that NON face. He stepped back. The figure stepped forward. Alexey swallowed hard and tried to force out. Hey! Who are you? No answer came. Only a faint, almost inaudible sound of breathing. But this breathing was not human, it seemed to pass through emptiness itself. Alexey felt a chill run across his skin. His legs turned to jelly, his hands went cold. The figure stepped even closer. And suddenly it vanished. Simply dissolved into the air, as if it had never been there. Only the empty street and the whisper of the wind remained. But Alexey felt it had not left. It stood somewhere nearby, behind him. He slowly turned. In the window of the nearest building, he saw the reflection, the figure was there again, behind his shoulder. Alexey bolted. The tape recorder slipped from his hand, hitting the stones, but it continued recording. On the tape, only his broken scream and a strange sound were captured, like footsteps, but too heavy to belong to a human. He ran out of the alley onto a lit street. Here, the lamps were burning again, and the air felt warmer. Yet his heart continued to pound, and his hands trembled. In the hotel, he sat for a long time in the dark, trying to catch his breath. "I need to figure this out," he thought. "If I leave now, it's all for nothing. I need to understand what it was. Who they are. And why this street disappears from the maps." But deep inside, where reason no longer reached, he knew, this encounter was only the beginning. Morning brought fog. It lay thick over the streets, hiding buildings and signs. It looked as if the city did not want to be seen. Alexey left the hotel with a heavy head. He hadn't slept all night. The blurred face, footsteps behind him, reflection in the window, they all kept coming to mind. He even checked the tape recorder, the recording had been preserved. His screams and that strange hum, like the breathing of a giant beast, were still there. He listened to it 3 times. Each time he reached that sound, a sticky fear rose within him. But it was that very fear that pushed him onward. If the recording exists, it means it's real. He wandered the city without a map, it wouldn't have helped anyway. The streets twisted and looped, as if drawn crookedly and in a hurry. At every corner, he felt eyes on him. Faces flickered behind curtains, but when he turned, the windows were empty. After a few hours, he arrived at the old quarter, where the houses seemed abandoned decades ago. Roofs had collapsed, windows were boarded, walls cracked. The air here was heavier, smelling of mold, rot, and dampness. Among these houses, one stood out. Its walls were blackened by soot, the door crooked and half torn off. A sign still clung above the entrance, but the letters had worn away. Alexey felt a shiver run across his skin. He pushed the door. It let out a long, painful creak. Inside, it was dark, only thin rays of light pierced through holes in the roof. Dust floated in the air like golden specks. The house smelled old. Not ordinary, not of dust or wood. Something else lingered. The scent was thick, viscous, almost sweet, like long-forgotten dead things. Alexey turned on his flashlight. The beam caught old furniture in the darkness. A broken cupboard, an overturned chair, a cracked mirror in its frame. In the mirror, he immediately saw his reflection and looked away. "Do not look into mirrors." The words from the tape echoed in his memory. In the center of the room stood a clock. Tall, standing on the floor, with carved columns on its sides. It was covered in a thick layer of dust, but the glass on its face remained clear. Alexey approached. The second hand moved. But not forward. It moved backward. With each tick, he felt something inside him breaking. He reached out and touched the glass. It was ice cold. Then he noticed, the hands weren't just moving backward. They were showing time shrinking ever faster. Minutes became seconds, hours flew in reverse. And with it, everything around him began to change. Dust vanished. The wooden floor grew cleaner, brighter. The walls seemed to pull back their cracks. The broken chair set itself upright, and the mirror in the frame became whole. Alexey recoiled. He watched as the house came to life before his eyes, returning to the state it had been in decades ago. Then he heard voices. Muffled at first, as if coming from the next room. Then more clearly. A woman's laugh. A man's voice. Footsteps. Alexey followed the sound. The door to the next room opened easily. There, a table was set, and people sat around it. A woman in an old-fashioned dress. A man with neat mustaches. 2 children. They were talking, but no words reached him. Their mouths moved, but no sound came. Only the clock continued ticking backward. Alexey froze. His heart pounded, his palms were sweaty. The woman suddenly turned her head. And looked directly at him. Her face was ordinary, but her eyes were black as coal. In an instant, the entire family froze. The children stopped laughing, the man dropped his hands. They all turned their heads toward Alexey. And something began to change in their faces. Features blurred, as on a photograph run underwater. Their faces transformed into the same faceless, blurred ones as the figure he had seen yesterday. Alexey bolted. He ran into the hallway, toward the door. But the house had already begun to collapse again, the walls darkened, the floor beneath his feet cracked, dust fell from the ceiling. He burst onto the street, slamming the door behind him. The fog wrapped around him completely. The city was empty once more. And behind him, inside the house, the clock still ticked. Only now, completely silently. Night fell quickly. The fog that had covered the city since morning had grown nearly impenetrable by evening. Alexey walked the streets, each step echoing strangely, as if the road itself could hear his approach. The city was dead. Occasionally, an abandoned gate creaked, the wind peeled flakes of old paint from the buildings, but he did not encounter a single living soul. He turned into the alley where he had seen the Reknaest sign yesterday. The street looked different by night. The lamps, which had seemed broken before, now flickered. One by one they went out, leaving dark patches where it would have been easy to get lost. Each of Alexey's steps echoed hollowly, but he began to hear something else, faint footsteps behind him, whispers, barely distinguishable words. "Keep going," something whispered. He turned. Nothing. The fog thickened around him, as if devouring the light. He felt the hairs on his neck rise. His heart raced, palms sweating. Alexey noticed movement in the corner of his vision. Dark silhouettes slid between the buildings. They had no form, just blurry shapes, but they moved precisely like people. He stepped back. The silhouettes also moved backward, following him, yet without making a sound. "Who are you looking for?" Alexey asked, his voice trembling. No one answered. The lamp before him went out. He stepped forward, and immediately another lamp went out. One by one, the street was plunged into darkness. He began to hear breathing. But this breathing did not belong to a human. It was deep, viscous, as if someone were sucking the air from the very street. Then he noticed shadows appearing on the walls of the buildings. At first, they were normal shadows cast by the lamps. But then they began to move on their own. They slid, twisted, writhing as if alive. Alexey quickened his pace. He could hear something large and heavy rustling behind him, careless yet silent at the same time. The wind carried a whisper. We've been waiting for you. Suddenly, a door appeared ahead. It was half open, a faint light glowing from inside. Without thinking, Alexey stepped in. Inside, a narrow corridor, its walls draped with dark fabric. It seemed alive. When he ran his hand along it, the fabric slightly pulsed, as if drawing warmth from his fingers. Behind him, a soft rustle sounded. He spun around sharply. The shadows on the walls had taken on human forms. Faceless figures stared at him. Their eyes were empty, black as coal, as if no light existed within them. Alexey ran. The corridor twisted like a snake, stretching endlessly. The faster he ran, the longer the path seemed to become. And then he heard a familiar sound, the ticking of a clock. He turned, and realized that at the far end of the corridor stood a clock. The same model as the one in the house, where the hands had moved backward. But here it was enormous, antique, with a dial that shimmered with a strange metallic gleam. With every second, the hands sped up. With every second, the surrounding space trembled, and the shadows drew closer. Alexey leapt to the side. The lamp flickered back on, and he saw the corridor now filled with faceless figures. They're playing with time, he thought, clutching the door frame. Then he noticed a message scratched on the wall, in what looked like blood or something similar: the clocks run backward. We watch every step. A chill ran down his spine. The shadows began to compress the space around him. As if the street itself was alive, breathing, pulling him inward. Alexey understood, if he didn't leave now, the street would take him forever. He dashed for the exit, bursting onto the open street. The fog stayed behind the door, the lamps lit up again, but the shadows remained in his memory. They were everywhere, in every corner, in every reflection. And he realized, the street was watching him. And this was only the beginning. Alexey barely had time to catch his breath after the forbidden street. But the sense of unease wouldn't let go. It seemed to live inside him, pounding in his temples and squeezing his chest. The next day, he met a woman standing by an old well on the outskirts of the city. Her gaze was weary, and her hands trembled. "Are you a journalist?" she asked hoarsely. "My name is Marina. I can show you." She fell silent, as if afraid someone, or something, was listening. Alexey nodded. His heart was pounding. The woman led him through narrow streets that seemed never to appear on any map. The houses were old, their paint peeling, windows boarded up. The silence was like a grave. "My son disappeared 20 years ago," she said quietly. "But sometimes he returns, the same as he was when he left." Alexey felt a chill run through him, goosebumps rising on his skin. "What do you mean?" he asked. "I saw him last night," Marina said. "The same age as then. He comes in dreams. Sometimes on the street, sometimes right into my home. And each time, he is not entirely a child." They approached an abandoned courtyard. In the center, two boys played hide-and-seek. "Is that him?" Alexey whispered. "No," the woman replied. "But he is like him. They all look alike. These children, they are trapped between times. They never grow up." Alexey watched them. Their faces were too clean, too perfect. But their eyes, the eyes didn't look at the world. They looked through it. And then one of the boys turned directly toward him. Alexey felt a cold stare that pierced him to the bone. "We're waiting for you," he said quietly. Alexey's heart tightened. He realized these children were not simply victims of time. They were part of something bigger. Marina led him to an old house on the outskirts. In the basement were photographs, letters, and diaries, records spanning decades of children who disappeared or did not age. Alexey flipped through the pages. The same name appeared again and again. The dates of disappearance, the child's age, all repeated. Every 27 years, someone vanished again. "This city is cursed," Marina said. "And these children are just part of the cycle." That night, Alexey found himself alone in the hotel again. The voice from the cassette echoed in his head. "It's always nearby. It watches. It waits." He sat by the window. Darkness fell outside. In the distance, two shadows flickered. Their movements were uneven, strange, as if their bodies did not entirely obey the laws of physics. Alexey realized they were not human shadows. They were those trapped between times. Then he heard a soft whisper behind him, "You're next." The next morning began with a fine drizzle. The city, seemingly empty, seemed frozen in anticipation. Alexey held the old bundle Marina had given him the day before. Inside were yellowed letters, diaries, and photographs. He settled in his hotel room, spread the materials across the table, and began examining them. Each document seemed steeped in time, and something else, something heavy and oppressive. The first letter was addressed to a child who had disappeared in 1923. The paper was fragile, the ink smudged in places by moisture. The text was strange, the words seeming to struggle to emerge, almost whispered. "We are waiting for you. Do not try to leave. Time is our home. You belong to us." Alexey felt a chill run down his spine. He opened the diary of the same child. On the pages were drawings, dark figures with blurred faces, clocks whose hands ran backward, streets that vanished. He then examined photographs. In one, a group of children stood on an empty street. Their eyes looked straight at the camera, but their gaze was empty, inhuman. Alexey realized he was seeing what Marina had seen. These children did not age. Each photo, a different decade, yet the children's faces remained almost identical. "This is impossible," he muttered. But the silence in the room seemed to agree, wrapping him in its cold breath. Next, he found an archive of old newspapers. Alexey flipped through the yellowed pages. There were notes about missing children, vanished families, and unexplained events. In 1876, a boy disappeared on Reknaya Street. In 1903, children found in the same place, they had not aged. In 1928, strange police reports of faceless figures watching townspeople. Each document gave the sense that the city lived its own twisted life, and that time here was not linear. Alexey noticed a pattern: the events recurred every 25 to 30 years. The cycle repeated. He calculated, the next peak should be now. His heart raced. He glanced out the window. The rain had intensified, but something moved outside the glass. Shadows. A slight flicker, as if someone were standing there, watching. "Who's there?" he shouted. No answer. Then he heard the creak of a door. Slowly, as if someone counted each step. Alexey turned. On the floor lay an old photograph. In it, he saw himself, the same age as now, but among children with blurred faces. He threw the photo aside. Cold pierced his chest. His heart seemed to stop. Night fell quickly. Alexey tried to analyze all the findings, but his fear grew with each passing minute. He felt that they were watching. And then, through the sound of the rain, he heard a whisper. "You found the chronicles, but you're too late." Night fell like a veil. The rain that had poured all day had stopped, but the air remained thick, like milky fog. Alexey stood at the entrance to Reknaya Street, his heart pounding in his chest. He held a flashlight and a recorder, ready to capture everything that might happen. The street looked different from the daytime. The fog thickened so much that the houses almost vanished, and the streetlights were sparse and flickering. Each step echoed loudly, and with every second, it seemed that the echoes were being repeated somewhere else. Alexey took his first step. Silence. Then, a faint rustling came from further ahead. He froze and listened. "Who's there?" he shouted. No answer. Only the fog quivered in the light breeze. Suddenly, he noticed movement out of the corner of his eye. A dark figure slid between the buildings. Tall, in a long coat, faceless. "They're here," Alexey whispered to himself. His heart raced, palms sweating. He moved forward. The streetlights began to go out one by one, and with each extinguished light, the shadows lengthened, twisted, and seemed to come alive. Then he heard footsteps behind him. He turned, nothing. But the feeling of being watched intensified. "They're coming," he muttered. "They always follow." And again, in the fog, a figure appeared. This time, there were several, faceless humans with blurred features. They moved slowly, almost silently, but Alexey felt their approach as a physical pressure. He quickened his pace. The figures mirrored every step, moving in perfect imitation. Alexey jumped over a puddle. They did too. He turned a corner, and there they were again, at every turn. The flashlight's beam caught a door to a house he had seen before. Alexey dashed inside and locked it. The house was empty, but the old clock on the wall began ticking backward. The second hand moved faster and faster, and the walls seemed to compress, whispering. "You've gone too far." Silhouettes of children appeared in the corridor. They stood in a line, their eyes empty, faces featureless, yet each looked familiar. Alexey realized these were the children who never grew up. And they were staring directly at him. "You found the chronicles. Now it's your turn," whispered one, the voice coming from the void itself. Alexey felt time around him slow and stretch. Every movement of his was being recorded and repeated endlessly. He realized that if he stepped outside, the street would consume him, and the faceless figures would become part of the cycle. Then he noticed a window with a mirror. He saw himself, but not entirely. His face was distorted, the features slowly dissolving, as if he was turning into one of those figures. His heart tightened, his hands trembled. He knew he had to act quickly. Alexey grabbed the flashlight, looked around, and dashed up the stairs to the second floor. There, reportedly, was an old attic, the only place where he might hide and survive the night. He locked the attic door. The silence was unusual. He heard only his own breathing. Then, a faint, almost childlike laugh sounded behind him. "You cannot hide," the whisper said. "We will always find you." Alexey turned. The attic was empty. He sank to his knees, grabbed the recorder, and played the tape again. The voice on the cassette sounded, "If you hear me, your cycle has already begun." At that moment, a knock came from the wall. A tap. Someone, or something, was knocking. Alexey understood, the night had only begun, and the street had already decided he was part of its story. The attic was cold and empty. The air was thick and damp, smelling of old wood and mildew. Alexey listened, the silence was unusually dense, almost tangible. But he knew, it was only a pause. Reknaya Street would not let him go. He descended the creaking stairs, cautiously moving through the house's corridors. Doors moved behind him as if following his motion. Each step echoed, turning into whispers, "You've gone too far, too late." Alexey held the flashlight, its beam weak, as if the street was absorbing its energy. At the end of the corridor, he noticed a door unlike the others. It was massive, wooden, with ancient metal patterns resembling clock hands. His heart raced. He realized that behind this door was the source of the street's power, its heart. He pushed the door open. The room was enormous, almost dome-shaped. In the center stood an ancient clock, as tall as a person. Its face shimmered with a strange light, the hands turning backward and forward simultaneously. Around it stood faceless shadows, motionless. And there, directly in front of the clock, he saw a figure. Tall, faceless, but its face seemed to change with every glance. It was the source of the strange pressure Alexey had felt since entering the street. "You have come," the voice spoke from both inside and outside. "You seek answers. But everyone who seeks becomes part of the cycle." Alexey froze. His heart pounded as if all the figures could hear it. He noticed old photographs, diaries, letters on the floor, chronicles of the missing. It all seemed to assemble toward the center of the room, integrating with the clock mechanism. "Each disappearance is a signature," the figure continued. "Each face is part of the story. Time is our tool. For you, a test." Alexey felt the weight increase. The air thickened, as if the dome itself pressed on his chest. He raised the flashlight and said, "I do not want to be part of your cycle." The figure smiled, though its face was nearly absent. "You are already here. But there is a chance," the voice was strangely gentle. "If you can understand the essence of the street, you can leave." Alexey looked around. He realized that to escape, he had to understand what held the street in time. He noticed patterns on the walls, resembling clock hands spiraling inward. Everything pointed to the central clock. "This is the center," he whispered. "If I stop it, I can get out." The figure moved. The shadows came alive, slowly encircling him. Time stretched, each of his steps felt like eternity. Alexey summoned all his willpower, stepped to the clock, and touched its hands. Then the incredible happened, the space began to crack, time quivered. The shadows screamed silently, the figure distorted. The clock face flickered, the hands froze. For a moment, the fog vanished, and Alexey saw the street as it once was, empty, without figures, without children. But inside, he felt that this world would never be the same. He stepped outside. Reknaya Street remained behind, but deep inside, he could hear its whisper. "We are waiting for the next one." Alexey opened his eyes. For a moment, the world seemed ordinary, the city noise, a few passers-by, the light of street lamps. He took a deep breath, but something was off. The air felt thick and viscous, as if he were still breathing through a layer of time filled with shadows. His heart beat slowly, yet every cell in his body was tense. He looked at his hands. They trembled, and his skin felt colder than usual. On his wrist shimmered a faint mark, a thin dark line, like a scratch, yet it seemed to live its own life. Alexey returned to the hotel. The rain had long stopped, and the streets glistened with wet asphalt. But in every reflection on the shop windows, he saw barely discernible figures, faceless silhouettes watching him, motionless. "They are watching," he whispered. The recorder in his hand switched on by itself. The same whisper sounded. "You have left, but the cycle is not complete." Alexey sat on the edge of the bed. He opened his notes, the chronicles of the missing, Marina's letters. Every document now seemed alive. In the diaries, the children seemed to whisper to him, their voices seeping into his mind. From the street came the sound of footsteps. Alexey looked out the window. On the wet pavement stood the figures he had seen in the attic and on Reknaya Street. They did not move, but their eyes were fixed on him. He felt his blood freeze. He realized, the street had not let him go. He had stepped outside, but it had woven him into its story forever. Hours passed, then days. Alexey noticed something strange. Time around him flowed differently. Sometimes the clocks in the room ran fast, sometimes slow. Sometimes objects shifted, as if someone were subtly guiding the space. Nights were the worst. He heard quiet footsteps in the corridor, children's voices, faceless laughter. Figures appeared in windows, reflections, shadows on the walls. He understood, even returning to the real world, contact with the street left a mark. He had become part of the cycle, though not fully. At the last moment, Alexey opened Marina's diary and saw an entry: "He who has seen the heart of the street cannot forget. But sometimes, if strong enough, he may observe and act. Not for himself, but for others." Alexey realized, now his task was to investigate, to warn, perhaps to help those who had not yet become part of the cycle. But deep down, he knew, the street was always near. And it waits for the next one. Why does this happen? How to decipher it? Alexey found himself again in the city library, an old building with high ceilings and shelves stretching into darkness. The light bulbs flickered, and the air was thick with dust and old pages. He pulled out the diaries, letters, and newspapers he had copied over the past few days. Every sheet seemed to whisper, "We are here. We are watching." Alexey felt a slight pressure on his shoulders, as if someone invisible stood behind him. He flipped through newspapers from the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Every article mentioned children disappearing under mysterious circumstances, strange faceless figures, and clocks that someone had seen moving against time. In one article, he stumbled across a strange word, nearly illegible: the keeper. The keeper. Who? He murmured. Of what? The diary entries confirmed it. In every disappearance, there was the next figure, a shadow that observed and guided the process. Alexey began to understand, the street was not just a physical place, but a force controlling time and fate. When he lifted his head, the library suddenly shifted. The shelves seemed taller, the ceiling stretching into darkness, and the lamplight flickered. Shadows on the walls began to take human forms, faceless, yet recognizable, children with empty eyes, figures from the chronicles. "You have come to know," a whisper echoed. "But knowledge will not save you. It only opens your eyes." Alexey drew a deep breath and summoned his will. He stepped forward, and the library seemed to respond. The shelves shifted, revealing a hidden passage. The passage led down to the basement. There was a room whose walls were covered with old photographs and city maps. On each map, houses and streets where disappearances had occurred were marked. In the center of the room stood an old clock, similar to the ones he had seen in the attic and in the house on Reknaya Street. "It's all connected," Alexey whispered. "Every disappearance, every shadow, they feed on time." Then he heard footsteps behind him. The shadows moved. Children with empty eyes walked toward him, stretching the space around. "We've been waiting for you," a whisper came simultaneously from all directions. Alexey realized that to save future victims, he had to delve even deeper into the street's secrets. But the more he learned, the stronger the street's influence on his mind became. Alexey stood in the library basement, surrounded by ancient maps, photographs, and diaries. The clock in the center ticked backward, but with every beat, the sense of time around him became thick and unreal. He stepped forward, reaching for the clock face, and froze. The hands moved on their own, speeding up and slowing down as if alive. Alexey felt a cold shiver run down his spine, not just the cold of the air, but the pressure of time itself. He remembered Marina's words from the diary, "If strong enough, one can observe and act. Not for oneself, but for others." Alexey closed his eyes and focused. He tried to mentally envision the moment a child disappeared on Reknaya Street. Concentration was difficult, the shadows stirred, faceless children whispered in what felt like countless voices at once. "I can change this," he whispered, trembling with tension. When he opened his eyes, the space around him had changed. The library basement stretched into a long corridor leading straight to Reknaya Street. The walls trembled, and time distortions made Alexey's steps feel endless. On the street, he saw children standing beside faceless figures. Fear gripped his chest, but he knew he had to act. Alexey stepped forward slowly, raised his hands, and said, "Follow me." At that moment, the clock hands in the basement began to spin faster, the light flickered, and time seemed to bend around him. The children froze, and the faceless figures began to distort, losing form. But the intervention had consequences. Alexey felt intense pressure in his head, as if his thoughts were being stretched across different timelines. He saw multiple versions of Reknaya Street, past, present, and future merging into one. "This is dangerous," he whispered, but he could no longer retreat. Summoning all his will, Alexey stepped forward, leading the children across the street. The shadows screamed silently, the clock hands spun faster and faster, and the world around shook. Finally, they crossed the street. The children stopped, their eyes returning to normal. The faceless figures vanished, leaving only a light mist that gradually dissipated. Alexey felt exhaustion, body and mind drained, but he understood, for the first time, the intervention had worked. He returned to the library, the basement became ordinary again, but the clock still ticked backward quietly, a reminder that the street was still alive and its influence had not completely vanished. Alexey returned to the library late at night. Everything around him was quiet, almost tangible, only the old clock ticked softly, as if counting time towards something important. He took out the last diaries and letters collected throughout the investigation and arranged them around a central table. On the table lay a mirror, old, darkened by time, with glass that slightly distorted reflections. Alexey knew, this was the mirror of Chronicles, the key to understanding Reknaya Street. He touched the glass. It was cold, almost alive. And suddenly, the reflection changed. He saw the street, but not as it was today. Past and future merged. Children who had disappeared decades ago ran through the streets, faceless figures watched them, the hands of the ancient clocks turned simultaneously in different directions. Alexey realized, the street was not just a place, it was living time, feeding on fear and human memory. Every disappearance, every chronicle, was part of its essence. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He focused. A new vision appeared in the mirror. He saw the children he had saved, but this time in real time. Their eyes were no longer empty, the shadows had vanished. Alexey understood, his intervention truly had the power to alter the cycle. But then the mirror showed him, a faceless figure standing among the children. His heart tightened, part of his soul had remained inside the street. He realized, complete victory was impossible. The price has been paid, he whispered. But it's not over. Alexey stepped back. The mirror trembled, the glass flickered, and the street disappeared from the reflection. The library was ordinary again, warm lamplight, the smell of old books, silence. He took the diaries, carefully stacked them, and with a slight ache in his chest, understood, he Chronicles would live on, but now he could observe and intervene. He had become the guardian of the Chronicles, the keeper of Reknaya Street's time. As he left the library, he paused. The city slept. The moon illuminated the empty streets, and Alexey felt relief. But deep inside, he knew, somewhere beyond the visible, the street awaited the next cycle. He stepped into the night air, flashlight in hand, and quietly said, "I will watch. And they will not win." With that thought, Alexey disappeared into the night, ready for new mysteries and new chronicles yet to be unraveled.